Hello, and welcome to this next topic of your training, domestic violence. Domestic violence is very prevalent today in society, and as new resource parents in training, it is very important that you're able to learn and understand what domestic violence is in order to best care for children who may come into your home who have witnessed domestic violence or whose parents have maybe suffered from domestic violence. Domestic violence is defined as a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain control and power over another intimate partner. The key word in this definition is intimate partner. Domestic violence is always between two people who are in an intimate relationship. Domestic violence can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, psychological, or technological actions or threats of actions or other patterns of coercive behavior that influence another person within an intimate partner relationship. Domestic violence is all about power and all about control. And all of the specific things that I just read are different ways that power and control can be used to manipulate and to abuse another person who someone is in an intimate relationship with. Domestic violence affects more than 10 million men and women every year. What this means is that nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner, and that's just in the United States. So, domestic violence is a very prevalent issue, and it is a very big issue that often leads to children being removed from their parents' care. And that's often due to the concerns or the safety of the children in the home if there are parents who are engaging in violence, and that violence or whatever the abuse may be can have a very, very detrimental effect on the child, creating an unsafe environment, which can lead to that child's removal. It's very important to understand how domestic violence can look. It's easy to assume or to think that domestic violence is always physical abuse, or we picture the woman with the black eye, or the angry husband. And these things can be true. However, there are so many more forms of domestic violence. One quote that I found that really just captures the feeling well of what domestic violence feels like to the victim is here to the right. This woman said, "My sense of self was disappearing, like I was falling into a hole of nothingness. I was only something in relation to him." And there again, that is very key because domestic violence perpetrators want to make their victims feel like they need that person. It's that sense of power and it's that sense of control. And so the person here on the right who has made this statement is explaining that feeling of, I didn't know who I was apart from him. I didn't know who I was in life, in our relationship, in myself. And so whatever that person was doing was really holding holding the control and the power over her in a way that made her feel like she just described right here. And that is that feeling that many, many men and women find themselves in and they get stuck in. It is like a hole and it is very difficult to get out of, which we will talk about more a bit later. This chart to the left is some of the most common forms of domestic violence. Again, I believe that we often think of domestic violence in the form of physical violence or sexual violence. However, it can be so much more than that. And this chart just goes over a few of them. So we do have physical and sexual. However, psychological violence or psychological manipulation, verbal abuse, also very common. And coercive control is another really big one. That could look like control over cell phone use. It could look like control over where the victim is or is not allowed to go, control over the bank account and what they're allowed to spend money on, things like that. Economic violence, which would be similar to what I just stated as far as just that control over money and making the victim feel like if they were not with this person, they would not be able to survive because this person has control of all of the family or all of the finances in that relationship. Maybe the house lease is in that person's name, the car is in that person's name, all the bank accounts are in that person's name. And so, what happens if the victim tries to or wants to leave is they essentially lose all ability to function in the real world. Neglect, stalking, and digital violence are a few other forms of domestic violence. I thought it was important to go over a few myths and realities of domestic violence. I believe that one of the most common myths of domestic violence is that it only happens to women. The fact, based on research, is that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been victims of some sort of physical violence by an intimate partner within their lifetime. 30 to 50% of people who identify as transgender will also experience domestic violence in their lifetime. This statistic is quite alarming. 1 in 3 women is what means 1/3 of women will at some time in their life be a victim of domestic violence, and 1 in 4 men, so 1/4 of men. So it is not just something that is man to woman or woman to man. This is very much across the gender span and really can affect anybody who is in an intimate relationship. Another common myth is that if a victim does not leave, it must not be that bad, or they must be okay with how they're being treated. This is also a very common myth. However, the fact is that leaving an abusive relationship is extremely difficult. And research has shown us that on average, a victim will try to leave an abusive relationship at least 8 times before they can leave successfully. This means that if a person does successfully leave an abusive relationship, they most likely had tried to leave that relationship at least 7 times before they finally were able to get away and to come to a place of safety. That is a lot of times, and that can happen over a period of months. It can happen over a period of years, but that is what research shows us. And like we talked about a bit earlier, another myth is that domestic violence is always physical abuse. And again, this is a myth because physical abuse can be one way, but remember, domestic violence is always about maintaining that power and control. And so physical abuse does not happen in every abusive relationship. And if it does happen, it's usually not the only form of abuse that's happening. Emotional, financial, sexual, isolation, threats, and intimidation are all forms of domestic violence. One of the most common questions about domestic violence is why don't they just leave? And this is an incredibly important slide because their domestic violence is truly a form of abuse. Like we said, it can take on many different shapes. However, ultimately, it makes a person feel like they are nothing. They are nothing unless they are with this person. And this often takes quite a long time for the victim, for the perpetrator of that abuse to really beat the victim down to a place where they feel like this. So many domestic violence relationships, they start out like many other relationships. They start off with 2 people in love. They start off with a really great relationship. And they start off with stability, and then very slowly little things change. And over time, the perpetrator in the relationship gains complete control and complete power over their victim. And so it's not it most of the time is not that this person was being abused prior to being in a committed relationship or not even a committed relationship. Maybe they just had been seeing each other or dating for some time, and the person was being treated very well. And then at some point, something changed, and slowly but surely, they found themselves in this place of dependence and just really being unable to separate themselves from this person who has power over them and who is abusing them through domestic violence. And so, like the previous slide had just said, on average, it takes someone about 8 different chances, or people try to leave about 8 different times before they successfully leave a relationship where um, they were being treated with domestic violence. And so it's not so easy as just, I'm going to get up today and I'm going to choose to leave. So there's 6 reasons, 6 common reasons that people stay. And I want to take some time going over each of these. One of the big reasons people stay is the hope for change. And we'll look at this in another slide here shortly. But when someone is in an intimate relationship, most of the time they are in a relationship with someone that they love or they trust or they trusted. And so there's always that hope for change. And often, because domestic violence takes on the form of um, really power and control, the person who is committing that domestic violence in the relationship is often a very manipulative type of person. And so it's very common for people like that to do something against the victim. Maybe that's physical, sexual, emotional violence, but then to apologize and to promise that it will not happen again. And so they often will go back and forth in this cycle, abuse, apology, promises. Sometimes they'll go as far as to, after a night of abuse, they'll go as far as to, bring flowers home the next day. And so the victim is really caught in this push pull of, you know, I know this isn't right. I know I shouldn't be treated like this, but also I know that my partner can be different or can be this way that I love. And so there's just this pull of, well, maybe, maybe he or maybe she will change. Um, Another big reason people stay is finances. And again, we talked about that a bit ago. Sometimes one of the forms that domestic violence can take on is financial manipulation, financial control. And so maybe the victim does not have any means in and of themselves apart from their partner. And so if they would choose to leave, they have no car, no home, no bank account, and they are really they're very helpless. And along with that is a place to go. In today's society, housing is really a huge issue no matter where you are in America. And so again, if someone leaves, they're looking at maybe being homeless. They're maybe looking at going to moving out to another family member or a former partner who, maybe also abused them in some way. And so they're not leaving out of maybe a feeling of at least this is better than, being homeless or sleeping under a bridge, that kind of thing. And jumping down to the shame, fear, no one will believe them, you can think to yourself, but there's so many domestic violence resources. There's so many domestic violence shelters out there. And there are quite a bit. Speaking from personal experience as a supervisor at Kobe's. We worked with a client who was in a relationship and left, and there was no domestic violence shelters in Lancaster County that were available for that person. And so it's easy for us to think that there is always a safe place for someone to go, and that's really not necessarily true. And so sometimes people believe that it's just they're better off staying than leaving. And so that's a huge part of reasons that people stay is because they don't know where they will live if they're not with that person. And they will maybe trade that abuse in order to have a place to at least sleep, at least lay their heads every night. And, that also comes with shame. And people who are in domestic violence relationships, they do face an incredible amount of shame. And they do often live under that feeling of, nobody believes me. Everyone thinks that if it was really this bad, I would have left. And so, how can I tell someone that this is happening when, they warned me or they told me before that I should leave? And so again, it just leaves a person feeling very, very stuck. And that's really just a core part of this is that stuck feeling. And another very relevant part of this is people stay because of children. Maybe they have children in the relationship and they fear that if they leave their partner will turn that abuse towards the children, or their partner will keep the children from them. And so very, very often people will stay in relationships because of the children. And the sixth reason is safety. And this may seem very counterintuitive, but again, if a person leaves with no means or access to finances, no safe place to go, no home, they will often feel like they are better off staying in the place they are right now than, taking that step and venturing into who knows what if they would choose to leave that relationship. So, another very important part of domestic violence is the cycle of abuse. And the cycle of abuse is something that has been created and researched over time based on just observing and studying domestic violence relationships. So this is a very common diagram that you can find on pretty much any website, any book that talks about domestic violence. So again, every situation is different and it does not always happen this way. However, this is how it can look in a domestic violence cycle of abuse relationship. So first is tensions building. So, someone may go into a relationship, they may feel like this is the person of their dreams. They love this person has, has been the best thing that's ever happened to them. And often domestic violence does not start right away. Often it's something that builds over time. And so, they are in a relationship, and again, it does not need to be marriage. They do not need to necessarily be living together, but they are in an intimate relationship, and so they're considered, partners at that time. So often tension increases, and there's a breakdown of communication. The victim feels fearful and feels the need to placate the abuser. So, maybe again, everything was going fine. There were no issues in the relationship. They love this person. They feel safe with this person. And then something happens. And maybe they took the person's credit card and bought something. And they come home and the person becomes incredibly angry, shouts, yells, maybe hits them. And the victim may just feel like, well, that's my fault. I should have not used the credit card without asking. And the person, who hit them may say, I'm so sorry. I'm just stressed because our finances are tight right now. I did not mean to do that. And then the victim may feel like this was actually my fault. I shouldn't have done this. I deserve to be hit because I didn't ask to use the money. I thought that we were at a good place. I thought that I had the freedom to do that, but it's really my fault. And so, that's that tension building. And then I skipped ahead a little bit to two, but then it actually happens. The person comes home, there's tension, there's a fight. Why did you use my card without asking? We don't have enough money for this. And then the incident of maybe screaming, yelling, maybe the person hitting the victim, that kind of thing. And then after that is often reconciliation. So whether it's right after that, whether it's the next day, the perpetrator says to the person, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Um, we are, tight on our finances and I just wasn't expecting this to happen. Or, I'm upset because I was going to use that money to buy you a gift or something like that. And so they often then will say, this, I'm so sorry. And then they will even maybe make it up and buy the person flowers or take them out to a nice dinner. Really do anything they can to reconcile that incident. And a very, very common one is that they'll say, I'm so sorry. This will never happen again. And then after that, often the victim says, that was just a one-time thing. It's not going to happen again. And then there is a period of calm where that incident, the actual incident of abuse is forgotten, and then they go back to where they were before. They go back to a happy place, to maybe the honeymoon phase, and everything seems fine. And then maybe it's the next day, maybe it's the next week, but something happens again. Maybe the person gets home from work and the house is not clean, or the house is a mess from the night before. And that person becomes very frustrated and says, I spend all day working. Why can you not do your part around here? And they may start fighting. There may be an argument. And then again, something might happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical abuse. Maybe it's just psychological, putting someone down psychologically, or verbal abuse and anger, maybe threats. Like if this happens again, say there's kids in the picture. If this happens again, I'm going to kick you out and keep the kids from you. And then again, it's very common that it happens in this pattern. After the fact, the person is very sorry, they apologize, they make up for it somehow. And then the victim again enters into a place of, well, this was my fault. I really should have had the house cleaned up. I really should have done this. I deserved whatever happened to me. And then they will say, I'm going to let this go this time. And maybe after the 10th time, they say, if this happens one more time, then I am going to leave. And maybe they try to leave. But again, the cycle just continues. And so this is back to those two words of power and control. The incident itself is not just the abuse or just the domestic violence. It's this cycle of abuse that makes up a domestic violence situation. And like you can see here, right after an incident is always reconciliation. And that is that part of power and control, where the perpetrator is able to often manipulate the victim into believing that this was the last time, or that they really can change. And then the victim, because of the reasons we said before, the reasons they don't leave, the victim can convince themselves that, it's okay. It's actually going to get better and I'm going to give it another try. So if you read stories or hear about incidences of domestic violence, I would encourage you to look back at this chart and to just kind of see how the situation that you're maybe observing could fit into this. And again, every situation's different, and it's we cannot generalize everyone to fit within this framework. However, this is a very common cycle that we see in domestic violence. Domestic violence has devastating impacts on the family system, and on children, incredibly devastating impacts. Some of the most common ones are social isolation and stigma. We often see intergenerational cycles of violence. So maybe a child saw their parent being treated with domestic violence or as a victim or perpetrator of domestic violence. And so it's familiar to them. It's what they know. When they enter into a relationship, they may, again, maybe not, but they may act or operate in the same way because it's what they saw and it's what they were used to. Economic consequences, health and well-being, uh, family structures can be disrupted. Like I said before, we see this a lot in child welfare where the children were removed because of concerns of domestic violence. So it can disrupt the family structure to the point of, a couple or individuals having their children removed from their custody. There can just be long-term effects on future relationships. It's very common for people who suffer from domestic violence to, if they leave a domestic violence relationship, to get into another relationship where domestic violence may happen again. So it can often be a cycle of victims finding intimate partners that treat them the same way they were treated by maybe a former partner. And there's a lot of psychological reasons for this, which we won't get into, but it's really just that it's that manipulation, that power and control that a person can make someone else feel safe and feel like they belong while at the same time perpetrating, abuse against them. And so it's not just that a person leaves and thinks, or a person leaves and they probably do think, I'm never going to do this again. But, for so many reasons, they often find themselves in similar situations again. As you are learning, as you are preparing to take children into your home, it's it is very common, like I said before, that one of the reasons, if not the reason, a child has been removed is because of domestic violence. And sometimes they are removed for other reasons, but domestic violence was also happening. And so your job as resource parents is to create a safe place for children to live with you while their parents are hopefully getting the help that they need. And so as you have children come into your home, I just want to go over these 4 points really quickly. It's very important to create that safety and stability in your home. Acknowledge what is going on with the children, discuss healthy relationships and boundaries, and seek treatment. And if you're working within the child welfare system, you will most likely know if there has been domestic violence. You will most likely know if this is something that a child has witnessed. And so it can help you as you work with that child's team of caseworkers, of therapists, to really come up with a plan that can best support that child. And one of the best things that you could do for a child in your care is really just to model that healthy behavior. For a child to see two individuals getting into an argument or working something out, and to see that not resulting in hitting or another major incident could truly be the first time that a child could have witnessed a healthy argument, a healthy solution, and that can help to rebuild that child's belief in what relationships look like. And so, again, modeling that healthy behavior in relationships with your partner, if you will be fostering together is incredibly important. And also just acknowledging what's going on. If a child talks about how daddy used to hit mommy, of course, speak to the correct people about that in case that's an incident that would need to be reported. Make sure the child's therapist is aware of that. But also just create a safe place for that child to tell you what it was like to live in that home and to witness those things and acknowledge that. Tell the child, I'm sorry that that happened. Nobody should ever hit anybody else, or it's never okay to scream at someone and call them bad names. Just helping to create an atmosphere of safety to help that child to view relationships and to view healthy relationships in a little bit of a different way. So this concludes our training on domestic violence. Thank you for your attention. And if there are more resources that you would like on this topic or anything that you would like to learn more about, please talk to the person that is coordinating your training and they can connect you to additional resources. Thank you.